Hi everyone, and welcome to today's latest EMSI webinar. Today we are going to talk about the importance of promoting the value of apprenticeships and how we can help you do that. I'm Anthony Horne from EMSI, and I'm also delighted to be joined today by Craig Millar, Director of Marketing, Sales and Corporate Affairs at Sunderland College. So here's what we'll cover off today. A very brief introduction to EMSI. Then we'll get into it, why we think it's so important for colleges to be able to show the value of your apprenticeships and some of the challenges that exist in doing so. We'll talk about one way in which we can help you to demonstrate your value through our apprenticeship economic impact analysis. Firstly, in demonstrating value to employers, and then secondly, we'll talk about some of the challenges around students and apprentices, at which point I'll hand over to Craig to hear about some of those challenges and from Craig's experience at both Sunderland College and also elsewhere in the sector. And throughout the webinar today, if you do have any questions, then please do ask them using the questions box in your control panel, and I'll get to those questions as soon as I can. So for those who don't already know EMSI, our mission is to use labour market data and wider economic insight to help inform our clients and partners. And we, in fact, work with hundreds of colleges in the UK and internationally, many of whom I'm delighted to see on today's webinar, as well as some new names. Welcome one and all. We also work in a number of other sectors, again, both here in the UK and internationally, all with the same intention, which is to use that data and economic insight to drive better, more informed and prosperous local economies. Now, this slide shows a potted history of EMSI from our US headquarters, where we were founded some 17 or 18 years ago. And I think the key takeaways from this slide are that we've been doing what we do for a long time now. So we really do have significant track record in understanding and analysing international labour markets. And in fact, the economic impact analysis, which I'll be talking about today with particular relevance to apprenticeships, was actually the very first thing that EMSI started doing all those years ago in 2001. So then let's get into it. Why is it so important for colleges to be able to show the value of apprentices and apprenticeships? Well, this slide here highlights just some of those external changes and external agencies that have changed or became more involved in recent times. And you don't need me to tell you about all of these, I'm sure. Perhaps the biggest of these external changes has been the introduction of the levy system, but it's also fair to say that that has just been one change in a real period of upheaval for the apprenticeship system as a whole, which has obvious impacts on colleges and other providers as significant providers of those apprentices and apprenticeships. And in fact, earlier this year, college with apprenticeships, and these are actually the 10 most common responses, and see how many of these you recognise. I'm sure you do recognise these, and perhaps you have your own unique challenges as well, and I'd certainly love to hear about those. And if we pick out just some of those 10 challenges that we found when talking to college principals earlier in the year, firstly, more competition for the attraction and delivery of apprenticeships. There are lots of other providers, including universities, for example, who are now operating in the apprenticeship space, which causes an issue. Expectations of young people. This is something that we might hear about a little later on from Craig, but principals were telling us that young people now are very well informed. They want to know what career path is best for them. They want to know about the various options that are open to them at their local college, and what does it mean to be an apprentice, and how much will they get paid, and what's it going to mean long term. So there are implications there. New procurement processes, again, slightly linked here to the levy, whereby there's now an increase in formal tendering processes by employers or public sector entities for apprenticeship provision, which again causes an issue and needs consideration. And quite frankly, some college principals told us that they had lost business through some of these changes and through this period of upheaval, which is understandably a headache and a big problem for colleges who may have indeed had previously long-standing happy relationships with local and national employers, but that's changed for various reasons. So all of those things, as well as those that I didn't highlight, would of course be helped if the college had a mechanism to shout about and demonstrate the value of apprenticeships, and particularly the apprenticeship provision that your college offer. So let's think about one way in which we can help you to do this. As I mentioned earlier, we have been delivering economic impact analysis to educational institutions right around the world for the best part of 20 years now. And because of the changes that we've just looked at, over the past 6 to 12 months, we have developed a section of that analysis that focuses particularly on apprenticeships and the apprenticeship provision coming out of your individual college. Now, that analysis has two main sections. Firstly, an investment analysis, and secondly, an economic growth analysis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those sections today. But I guess most importantly, when we were developing this analysis and thinking about how we could help colleges to demonstrate value to employers, this analysis allows you to do that because it talks in the language that employers are very comfortable with. Things like return on investment and improved and increased productivity. So let's look at those two sections now in a little more detail. Firstly, the investment analysis. And an investment analysis simply looks at costs and benefits associated with something, and then analyzes the return on investment that comes out of that. Now, when we're thinking about employers and apprenticeships, we analyze the true costs that employers accrue. And they are the obvious things like the fee they pay, the contribution to the levy if relevant, but also some of the non-obvious stuff like what's the specific wages paid to their apprentices and the time that they assign to supporting and mentoring and managing their apprentice or apprentices. And just using that example, we find that initially time spent by the employer on supporting an apprentice or apprentices and releasing them off the job is quite high, but will typically decrease in time, whilst at the same time, the actual output and productivity of the apprentice will be increasing. So the cost initially outweighs the benefit, but this absolutely changes over time, and the return on investment to the employer over the period of the apprenticeship is absolutely positive. So when we run the numbers, we can see and understand the positive impact and the actual pounds and pence return on investment that employers get from their investment with you as a college provider in their apprenticeship provision. And there are various ways of demonstrating and articulating that, both in a for every pound or every £100 or every £1,000 invested by that employer, what do they get back? As well as some more specific information about their sectoral impact and what those individual apprenticeship pathways are offering them as an employer in a particular sector. Now, that was very much focused on employers to begin with. But what about students? What about apprentices themselves? At this stage, I'm going to pass the microphone over, and I'm delighted to introduce Craig from Sunderland College, who is joining us for this section of the webinar. And Craig, it would be really fascinating to hear about some of those particular challenges that you see with Sunderland College and your experience elsewhere when you're engaging with students and the apprentices themselves.
Hi, Anthony. You all right?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Craig.
Good, good. Sorry, I just suddenly realised I've got a very squeaky chair, so I'm hoping that doesn't come through too much. But yeah, I think in answer to your first question in terms of challenges, a bit of background, I only joined Sunderland College a year ago, so whenever I'm coming on to some of the solutions or some of the ways that we're talking to students and working with those people who are offering them advice, some of that is based on previous experience and not necessarily what we're doing right now, but what we're intending on doing in the future. I think from my perspective and what I've evidenced, the biggest challenge that we've got is learners, particularly young learners, having a solid understanding of what an apprenticeship is, and having that understanding being built from a very early age. And I think that students and their parents and schools and the partnerships that we've got with schools in Sunderland is really strong, but those people that are wrapped around those students still don't really understand what an apprenticeship is in detail. They get the idea, and in many respects the fact that they get the idea causes some of those challenges because they see it as the ultimate goal, and almost the desired route that their child should go on, and sometimes the students are thinking that as well. So they do understand the nature of apprenticeships, but they don't necessarily understand the best way that they can go about securing an apprenticeship and what that actual process is. And I think we still get, and I've seen it at this college, I saw it in September, and I've seen it in previous colleges, we get parents that turn up in September for enrolment and say he wants to do an apprenticeship. And that's a real shame because that's, it's too late. The opportunities to make sure that they've got the skills that they need to demonstrate to an employer they haven't passed. They will get them whenever they come to college, but they're certainly not going to be able to go straight out and get an apprenticeship. So I think we as a sector need to do a lot more work with students from younger ages, with their parents and with schools, to try and build up that understanding. And I think, this is what I was saying before. We're getting a vast number of students who, on application forms or on data cards that we're collecting from them whenever we're at schools, they're expressing an interest in apprenticeships. They want to do it, but actually, if you look at the numbers, the number of students who want to do an apprenticeship or think that they're interested in an apprenticeship far outweighs what the market can handle. So there's another challenge for us as an institution in managing expectations. I think the apprenticeships, looking at adult learners and those people who are already in work and where levies being brought in, and it's about upskilling. We've got a completely new challenge there, where we, for example, we may have a contract with an employer who's wanting to use their levy budget to upskill members of staff, but actually the staff, the employees in that organisation just aren't aware of what an apprenticeship is and still have an old-fashioned view of an apprenticeship, and instantly are quite negative about it. So there's a lot of work that we, again, as a college, but as a whole sector, need to do to build up that knowledge amongst adults as well. And I think those two things almost go hand in hand, where you're talking to adults both as individuals who may want to study an apprenticeship and go on to master's level apprenticeships, or you're talking to them because they are interacting with young people either through family or through their own children. That would be my summary of challenges. I think as a college, what we're trying to do, and some of this we've already implemented, some of it is, as I said before, things that we need to do over the forthcoming months. So I have a real strong focus on merging the communications around full-time and apprenticeship routes. So we're very much about trying to inspire a learner from those early ages into a subject area, and then start to talk to them about the different routes that they can go down. So inside our new prospectus, we have already started to say very clearly on a subject spread whether or not that's available as a full-time route or it's available as an apprenticeship or both. And then we are creating that pathway through both full-time study and apprenticeship study, and a higher learner can move from one to the other. So we're spending a lot of time building up those communications, building up those visual infographics or pathways that we're able to then work with our schools and work in schools and work directly with the students. From Sunderland College's perspective, we've got a lot of work to do in terms of merging those communications digitally, and that's part of future web developments that we need to go through. But we're certainly beginning that process of, you can study this subject, you can do it in an academic way, you can do it as a full-time professional and technical qualification, or you can do it as an apprenticeship. And I think we're very dedicated. Our whole new recruitment approach is about working with students from a very, very young age to support that transition. So working with them in year 10, year 11 isn't really enough. And it's not, going back to what I was saying earlier on, in terms of the students being given the opportunity to develop some of those skills that are needed to get them work ready, and therefore an apprenticeship being a valid route for them as soon as they leave school. We're working with students as young as year 7 now, and that is a big driver inside our recruitment strategy. And that around that is about different pathways of study and breaking down some of these maybe myths that exist around apprenticeship, but certainly about getting across the message of what a learner needs to be doing to prepare themselves. We're doing CPD sessions inside schools, so we're going along to the schools. I've got one booked in on Tuesday next week to make sure the curriculum teams inside the school environment are aware of those different options. And I think schools are a bit worried about apprenticeships. They don't really quite get them. It's that whole older generation. Unless we work in the sector, we've still got that traditional view of what an apprenticeship is. So we did a lot of the CPD sessions. We must have about 10 booked in across different schools, and we're also trying to deliver presentations as part of parents' evenings. So traditionally, colleges, recruitment teams would go along to year 8 options evenings, year 9 options evenings, year 11 and parents evenings, but we just have a stand. We're trying to work with the schools, and they're coming completely on board. They see the benefits of this, to talk directly to parents in that group setting and give them a full picture of what the options are post 16, and to manage their expectations, and to talk to them about how best they can prepare young people for whatever route it is that they want to go down. As part of that, we're doing loads of dedicated apprenticeship events, and again, it's this focus, not in year 10, year 11. We need to be doing it much earlier than that. Once they get into year 11, the schools have got them on lockdown, so we've got to work with them much earlier on and raise awareness of what they need to do to prepare themselves. And I think what you're talking about there earlier on in terms of data is a key driver for us in terms of all of our communications. We're really trying to focus on LMI information, gaps in employment, growth areas, salaries available. And I think one of the pieces of work that we're wanting to do over the next year is for each subject area, each curriculum area, not only have a clear understanding of what average job salaries are in that sector, but what average apprenticeship salaries would be, how quickly you would move past an apprenticeship onto a junior level, onto a more senior level. So we're going to spend a lot of time working on that, and that's maybe somewhere where MZ can support us. We delve quite heavily into Career Coach and pull out lots of statistics and use some other sources of information that we've got. But it's just that clarity of message to a young person to inspire them, but also to a parent to demonstrate how quickly actually an apprenticeship route might be the best route for a young person to get into employment, or for somebody that's going to be going through retraining as well. So statistics are really heavily a part of our communication strategy. We're also trying to work with our current apprentices and our current employers. So those events that we're talking about that we're doing in school and at college, both for our current students and prospective students, we're bringing employers in all the time. We're bringing current apprentices in to talk to the students about their experience. It's just all of that continual remind and reinforcing about how a young person should go down that path to reach the apprenticeship. That's pretty much the summary from us.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Craig. And some really fascinating stuff there in a number of different ways. And I think we often hear about the fact there's a skills gap in this country and in other countries as well, and sometimes that gets targeted at the FE sector in particular. And I often think actually what we're talking about sometimes is an information gap, and you've just highlighted some of that and some of the key ways that you guys are going to tackle that, not just with employers and young people and adult apprentices, but also those other influences like schools and teachers and parents and everything else. And I think, as you highlighted there, one of the key aspects there is being able to articulate and break out those positive aspects of apprenticeships and how perhaps they compare to other options, other pathways through FE and also pathways through their career. So that's absolutely why we do what we do with the impact study, the apprenticeship analysis, and also our kind of wider LMI work. And Sunderland College are one of our best partners, and we look forward to continuing on that pathway. So thanks very much for contributing there, Craig. It's absolutely fascinating and incredibly helpful. So much.
No problem at all.
So one of the things that Craig touched on there was the need to demonstrate value to apprentices themselves, or young people or adults who are interested in becoming an apprentice, but also those wider influences like schools and parents and other mentors and even perhaps careers advisors internally. Well, one way we can help with that is, again, through the investment analysis as part of the apprenticeship economic impact study. Because just as we saw earlier with employers, we can analyse the return on investment to apprentices themselves. Again, how we do that is by looking into the true cost of apprentices, of which there are a number. Again, those obvious costs like material costs, any supplies that they need for their framework, but also a slightly less obvious one in that we can analyse the foregone wages, depending on their age, that they would have been likely to be able to attract had they gone directly into the world of work, as well as other supplementary costs as they engage in and progress through their apprenticeships. And when we do that, what we find is that wages initially will often be lower than equivalent workers in the early stages of their career, and even perhaps throughout the apprenticeship itself, depending on how long it takes. But that will change, as Craig alluded to, as they enter the labour force post-apprenticeship. They'll see a dividend that will then be analysed, and we can talk about it right throughout their lifetime of work. And there is a particular earning pathway and a particular earning trajectory associated with apprenticeships that differs between different levels and differs between different sectors. And that is exactly what we analyse and allow you to articulate. So that's the investment analysis, or the return on investment analysis, to both employers and apprentices themselves, which can obviously then be used for those other stakeholders such as parents and schools and other advisors as well. Now, the other section of the apprenticeship economic impact analysis is an economic growth analysis. And quite simply, this is where we bring together the increased productivity and increased apprenticeship earning potential associated with delivery of apprenticeships and analyse how much additional economic growth falls out of that. So how does your unique college apprenticeship provision, both now and historic provision, reflect through in terms of employment, earnings, productivity and spend in your local economy? That's exactly what we are looking to analyse. And it's key to understand that this is absolutely specific to your college, because it depends on your portfolio, both right now and historically. So which sectors do you serve? Which standards and frameworks do you offer? Which age of apprenticeship provision do you have, and how's that changed over time? Because, of course, people at different ages and working in different sectors will earn different amounts of money and spend that amount of money differently in your local economy. Likewise, businesses in sector one will spend their money and invest their money in different ways to employers in sector two. And getting right down into that granular level of detail and understanding is exactly what we specialise in, and it's exactly what the apprenticeship economic impact analysis can help you to do. So alongside the return on investment figures that we saw earlier, you can have at your disposal an aggregate figure demonstrating the total economic impact, that total additional economic growth that can be attributed to the delivery of your apprentices right now and in the past, and how that's going to continue to positively impact on your regional economy going forward. So hopefully you can see how having this type of analysis and this type of data in-house can or could help with some of the challenges that you saw earlier, and indeed some of the challenges and solutions that Craig kindly shared with us. For example, not all of your competitors will be able to talk in this language, and it's language that, as I suggested earlier, employers are very comfortable with, and in fact young people, adults and their influencers are also very comfortable with as well. What's my progression opportunity? How much am I going to earn? Is this a better option for me than a different education pathway? Hopefully you can see how this type of analysis externally provided by ourselves could be used in bid writing, procurement, and some of those direct negotiations that I'm sure you have with employers. And indeed in some of those student recruitment and guidance and support issues. And of course, what we're all about is helping you to win new business and grow. We heard earlier on some of the challenges that college principals had told us about was around losing business and struggling to retain some of the historic business that they had. Well, this type of analysis is all about helping you to get on the front foot and win new business and continue to grow and be the best provider of apprenticeships in your regional economy and the best employer partner in your regional economy. One other thing to note is that we can run this analysis for your apprenticeship provision in total, and we can also break down the analysis into different sectors. And this is something that actually college partners and clients of ours asked us to do because they had different challenges for different sectors. So they had different procurement processes, for example, for a particular sector, and they needed some, let's say, engineering specific analysis. We can absolutely do that, as well as housing that within an analysis of your apprenticeship provision in its entirety. And in fact, the first college to go through the process earlier this year was Leeds City College, and they commissioned us to do so in order to help with their ambitious apprenticeship plans. And we have a short case study on that, which I will make sure that everyone who registered for the webinar gets a hold of. And there's some interesting information in there about how they plan to use the analysis and are in fact already doing so. So that's it for today. I hope you found it useful. In the meantime, whilst you're waiting for that case study, please do drop me a line and we can discuss your specific needs and talk about how to get these figures into your hands. Thanks again to Craig Millar for joining me and sharing his thoughts, and thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.